Hi, I'm Rachel Edidin.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we're the hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast all about the ins, outs, and retcons of our favorite superhero soap opera.
We're also the hosts of Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men,
which you're watching right now,
where we talk about the X books that come out each week.
This week, we're going to be looking at the week of June 24th, 2015. I believe we've got one pre-Secret Wars book and then two Secret Wars series.
We do indeed. We also are going to be taking a look at me getting over a terrible cold and on a lot of cold medicine, so I'll do what I can, but I apologize in advance.
I would like to point out that I encouraged you to take this week off. I really could have soloed it.
Oh, no, I'm going to fight to my last, like Revanche in the 90s when she had the legacy virus.
You know how that ended, right?
Let's not think about that part. It'll be fine.
Let's maybe choose a new metaphor.
Okay, well, anyway, one thing I also want to bring up is something that's happening next week, which is that Marvel's releasing a previews catalog that's going to include all of the books and creative teams in All New, All Different Marvel, which is the Marvel Universe coming out of Secret Wars. So, since we've heard very, very little about the X-line so far, just that Old Man Logan and X-23 as Wolverine are going to be around, this is where we're going to hear about the fate of the X-Men for the foreseeable future. A lot of fans are nervous because we've seen Marvel seemingly push the X-Men out of the spotlight for quite a while since they don't have the movie rights. They've confirmed that they're going to still be doing X-books, so we'll see. A lot of rumors flying around. I'm very curious. I'm choosing to be extremely optimistic. Marvel's been doing a great job in the last few years. Hopefully they still will.
You know, I kind of want to talk about the movie rights thing and the idea that Marvel's been quashing the X-line, because I tend to look at that and I see a lot of fans and a lot of critics reading a lot of weird malice into it. And while I definitely agree that the X-line hasn't gotten the kind of attention that the, Marvel cinematic properties have, I'm kind of disinclined to read it as deliberately burying it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we tend to look at stuff like that and go, from a very sort of fundamental attribution error-centric point, where if they're doing it, there must be a deep agenda. And I think it's worth nitpicking the point and saying that Marvel hasn't been promoting the X-line with nearly as aggressively or nearly as prominently as the lines connected to the cinematic properties they own, but it seems to me much more to be lack of attention than, again, trying to bury something.
Yeah, we're always going to have X-Men comics. We're not necessarily going to have a bunch of official X-Men t-shirts or coffee mugs or whatever until such time as Marvel might get the movie rights back.
There are actually a lot of official X-Men t-shirts and coffee mugs.
Oh, okay, well...
They're just not getting top billing space on Marvel.com. But
yeah.
They are out there and licensed officially.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there are a ton of bootlegs.
So we'll see what we get. I'm very curious to see what happens. I mean, the X-Men have benefited from a lot of major changes lately. Cyclops becoming a revolutionary semi-terrorist. Awesome. Stuff like that. So we'll see. Open mind. We'll start with Uncanny Avengers 5, as it turns out, of 5. Written by Rick Remender with art by Daniel Acuna. So this is the last issue of what has turned out to be a very short Volume 2 of Uncanny Avengers. And I gotta say, I'm not sad to see it go. I'm a person that will try to find a thing to like about everything. And with this series, I've had a really hard time. It has a good premise. I mean, the Unity Squad from Uncanny Avengers Volume 1, mutants and humans working in harmony. We have an interesting cast of characters that could really get along very well. But unfortunately, this only arc to Volume 2 has felt like it should have been a third or fourth arc once we've gotten to know the characters in the context of the book. Once we've seen them bounce off of each other, and then we would have, arcs for all of them, instead of just stuff randomly happening, instead of the characters getting split up almost immediately on Counter-Earth, and not really interacting as a team at all. We even have a bunch of dropped plot lines. I mean, some of the stuff that was going on with Sabretooth and Rogue, some of the character development we saw there beginning, just doesn't go anywhere. I have a feeling this book was intended to continue past Secret Wars with its initial numbering. We've now found that no books are going to do that, and I think this one really tries to rush the ending because of it. It doesn't work, and Volume 2 in general has not worked. That's not to say there aren't some good things. I mean, we do see the emotional ramifications of the parentage of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch actually being addressed. With
Although you'd really think they'd be used to it by now.
You would. I mean, they change parents every few weeks.
How many sets of parents have they gone through?
Yeah, but still, if you're going to make a story decision like that and hype it up, then, do something with it, which this issue did. We see some cool stuff with the Vision. We see Dr. Voodoo actually doing anything instead of just charging up an attack Dragon Ball Z style like he's been doing for the first 4 issues. But it just feels like a wasted opportunity. We've seen excellent work from Remender before. We've seen excellent work from Acuna. And I do think in this series we do see some of that excellent work from Acuna, especially the colors. I like those a lot. Feels like weird dark superhero Tron or something. But overall, this series didn't need to exist.
God, we should hop you up on Dayquil before reviews more often.
I mean, I know I tend to be very positive, and again, nothing against the creative team. They're very, very talented. I just wish this had gone somewhere other than where it went. Should you pick this series up in retrospect? Probably you can skip it.
Next up, we have X-Men 92 Infinite Comics number 3, written by Chad Bowers and Chris Sims, drawn by Scott Koblish, and colored by Matt Milla. Again, this is the third digital installment. Issue 1 in print also came out today, and that collects the first 2 digital installments. We've mentioned this before, but this is a series where if you're choosing either or, I would highly, highly recommend going digital, because it does a lot of really fun stuff with the Infinite Comics format.
Yeah, there are a lot of cool transitions where one part of a panel will stay the same, another part will change, and that's part of the storytelling. It's not just like a 3D movie where all of a sudden there's severed heads flying right at you for no reason. Like, it actually does contribute to the story and the feel.
Now, before we go into the review proper, I should also remind you of something we brought up last time, and give the obligatory note that we have all of the personal conflict of interest on this series. It's co-written by my best friend. We're characters in it. Jubilee calls us dweebs this issue, which is actually the first the first life achievement or whatever it's called that I've ever actually entered into Facebook.
That's a good place to start.
Called a dweeb by Jubilee.
So,
and I kind of, while I don't regret, friendship, I do kind of regret that automatically taints this review, because this is a really, really good comic. The first 2 installments were really fun and really worthwhile reads and really entertaining. And with the third, the series takes a very sharp turn. It retains a lot of the homage and a lot of the elements, but it gets meta in really interesting ways, and it gets really smart, and I think crosses over from entertaining to very solidly good.
For me, this was also the issue that stopped being such a direct animated series homage and really started being about the 90s in general. The feel of them, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff, all sort of crammed together.
Well, and the very peculiar and specific clash between loving the X-Men through the animated series and loving the X-Men through the comics, especially the concurrent comics. Because ultimately, thematically, I think that's what this book's really about.
Yeah,
is that point of conflict.
Last is E is for Extinction number 1, written by Chris Burnham with art by Ramon Villalobos and colors by Ian Herring. And this may be one of those choose-your-own-expert-opinion adventure reviews right here, because Rachel and I are on very different pages about this book.
We really, really are. And actually, speaking of what we talked about with the last book in continuity, this is one that I have serious trepidation about recommending to people who aren't familiar with Grant Morrison's run.
Yeah, that said, Grant Morrison and mostly Frank Quitely's run from around the turn of the millennium on New X-Men is seminal and stellar, and I highly recommend it. But it's also really weird. And for me, E is for Extinction. So most Battle World books are like, hey, let's flash back to this event and see what happens if it would have continued. Or let's flash back to this era of comics, or this parallel universe that was previously covered. With this, it's not so much a temporal successor to Morrison and Quitely's run, so much as it's sort of a philosophical break. It's sort of a illogical conclusion to the philosophy that was sort of embodied by that run by Morrison and Quitely. It's like if you took that book and sort of squared it and then turned it sideways. Basically, this takes the idea from Morrison and Quitely's run that mutants were the next step in human evolution and were basically going to take over the world, and just keeps running with it. Mutants are now the dominant species. All humans are doing their best to have mutant children. Mutants are famous. The rebellious group of students and Magneto from that storyline now basically run the X-Men, and Scott and Emma are left as sort of the old classic X-Men who are clearly irrelevant at this point. It's weird and nihilistic and dark, and for me, altogether different than anything I was expecting. And this is the first Battle World book that's really done that for me. A lot of them are just like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? And this is more like, okay, let's take what the X-Men are about, and let's just take that so far into left field it's barely recognizable. And I love that about it.
So when we discussed this before recording these reviews, I think you compared it specifically to Silent Hill 4.
I did, yeah, which was the Silent Hill team. It was still by Team Silent, who made the first 3 games, but they were trying to do something very different, and in many ways it really worked, in many ways it really didn't, but it's hard not to applaud Silent Hill 4 for trying so many different things.
See, for me, it's Silent Hill Origins.
Huh.
Maybe not Origins? What's the one with the trucker?
That's Origins.
Yeah, Silent Hill Origins. The one I don't like. I agree with you that it's audacious. I like the idea, I like the concept that it's playing with, of taking the very sort of not even anti-superheroes, just sort of superhero denial, nihilism that was sort of a theme, and a theme that I think was interestingly subverted too, which is something this book misses, and I'm going to get back to that in Morrison's run, and running with it and seeing where it goes story-wise. I like that concept. I think the execution is significantly lacking. I love the art. The art is gorgeous. Villalobos is a really, really, really good follow-up to Quietly because they've got a lot of the same sort of texture.
Everyone's very doughy and weird looking. It's great.
In really stylized ways, but he's also very much got his own voice. He's not doing Quietly, which I really appreciate. It feels like a logical evolution stylistically. The writing, to me, it's not just the story that feels cynical. The composition feels cynical. Because Morrison's X-Men was all about questioning and subverting the concept of superheroes and the fundamental concepts of X-Men. But it was driven from a very, very intensely narratively focused point. I mean, there was a lot of story. And also there was a lot of, again, subversion of that nihilism. I think that's something that's a running theme in Morrison's work, that a lot of his stuff is seen as very, very deconstructionist, but it tends to be deconstructionist in really celebratory ways, in ways that involve reclaiming a lot of the pieces. And I don't see that happening in this book.
That's a fair point. I mean, it is certainly really dark and in some ways depressing, but I should also say this is just issue number 1. The series really will be judged, once it's complete, like as a whole work. For me, as a first issue, this makes me intensely interested in seeing where it goes.
It makes me interested, but really skeptical. Again, something that I think carries over from Morrison's run. Morrison came in without a very detailed working knowledge of the X-Men and characters he was writing, but gave them very distinct voices. I don't think Burnham does. I think his characters read like thin parodies of the already exaggerated Morrison characters, and that's a really big problem for me. My point of comparison is Silent Hill Origins for a really specific reason. We are actually both huge Silent Hill fans, and especially my favorite Silent Hill games are the first 3 because Team Silent, but also because they're driven by really, really cohesive internal logic. I mean, they're deeply weird and sometimes they're utter nonsense.
Can of light bulbs.
But for example, Pyramid Head is the villain of Silent Hill 2 for very solid reasons. And for reasons that make sense in the universe. He starts showing up after the movie came out and after he became iconic from Silent Hill 2 because people associate him with Silent Hill. And this feels like the equivalent of that. This feels like someone taking a lot of the trappings of the Morrison run, but not really the core engine that propelled them. And from what I've seen in this issue, I'm not yet convinced that there's an engine propelling this in a significantly different direction, and that it's not basically, the papier-mâché facade. I'd like to see it become more than that, because it's a cool concept and it goes in really interesting directions. But it's not there yet for me.
So there you have it. At the very least, a controversial issue. Form your own opinion.
So that's 3 books down. Out of that lot, what would you say is our issue of the week?
I think our favorite issue this time around was X-Men 92 Infinite Comic number 3. It sticks very much to the feel that it should have, that sort of, this is 1992 so hard feel. Keeps the animated series feel, but it also starts doing new things. It really shifts the book in an interesting direction that feels like a natural evolution from the first 2 issues. It's hard to do middle chapters well. This is a middle chapter, and it was great. Still a very recommended series. What about our panel of the week?
Our panel of the week is actually from E is for Extinction number 1. I'm going to put this up without context. If you have read the Morrison run relatively recently, you may understand what it may have come out of. If not, and you're reading this book, you'll find out. But it is one hell of a visual statement and one hell of a half of a title splash.
Certainly a good declaration of intent for this book. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching.
If you like what you've seen here, please check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. New episodes go up every Sunday at rachelandmiles.com, also on iTunes and Stitcher. What have we got for them this week?
This week, we're going to be covering the 1986 annuals for Uncanny X-Men and New Mutants. They're both Mojo stories. They introduce Psylocke and Longshot to the X-Universe for the first time, and feature the Proto-X-Babies, who we will come to know and love.
That podcast, these video reviews, and everything at rachelandmiles.com are brought to you by our very cool Patreon subscribers. We are an entirely ad-free and listener-supported project, and those are the folks who make it possible. And I should mention something else they've made possible, because I am so excited about this, and it's going to be going away in a week, is our T-shirts of the month. And June's is one that I have had sort of in the back of my head for a really long time. We commissioned BPRD and Harrow County artist Tyler Crook to make real. It is 3 Wolverine Moon, and can we have a moment of silence?
Let's just appreciate
beautiful,
that
beautiful thing.
Thank you, 2015, for making this possible.
Thank you, Tyler Crook, and thank you, Patreon. So yeah, if you want to join the folks who again make things like 3 Wolverine Moon and these video reviews happen, we're not as cool as 3 Wolverine Moon. You can do that at via the link either above or below this video, depending on whether you're watching it on our site or at YouTube. And I think that wraps things up.
Yes, indeed. We will see you next time. Like, I seriously think this is the legacy virus. There was a lot of pus and phlegm in the legacy virus. I feel like
the first thing it would do is amp up your mutant powers.
I don't think I have any of those. We've established that we're not mutants in X-Men 92.
But your hair is it's only its regular level of resplendence.
Oh, well, Moira...
I feel like you'd get an amazing, elegant mane.
Maybe. Moira McTaggart just got sick and died.
Yeah.
She was human.
I don't think there's a lot of phlegm involved, though.
I feel like in the 90s they couldn't draw phlegm, they just drew more pouches.